But we've also invited our supervisors so that, like the one who's over our shops and those, so that they can start being part of this training too. Okay?
That sounds great. Good. Well, welcome everyone. We appreciate your joining us this morning. We're going to talk today. First, I'm going to start out just kind of reminding everyone of some things that you already know about Brady Trucking being a drug-free workplace. We'll talk a little bit about our policy, and we're going to emphasize a little bit more on focus a lot of our discussion today on what's reasonable suspicion, because one of the roles that you have as supervisors and leaders is you have to help us enforce this policy. So you'll see as we go through the drug testing policies, we have certain processes that are followed when we hire someone, but there's also that part of reasonable suspicion. And so you play a critical role if you see something that's going on, and we're going to help define that for you for what that is. Ross has already sent out something, to give some information and guidelines on that, but we'll talk more about that today. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of reiterate your policy. So your policy prohibits being under the influence of or the use, sale, distribution, manufacture, or possession of alcohol or drugs, paraphernalia or any combination thereof. It can't be on the premises, the property, the work site, in company vehicles, equipment, any private vehicle parked in the company premises or at a company's work site. So we have a zero tolerance policy for illegal drug use. The company has a drug testing policy as well, that they reserve the right to conduct drug testing for pre-employment screening, specific incidents. And tell me, Ross, I believe do you have a post-accident? So if there's an accident that occurs, is that part of the process where they'll go in and be tested?
Yes. Okay.
Fitness for duty, random testing, suspicious sample, post-accident. So we take a very aggressive stand. They're operating trucks. There's a lot of risk to others and to themselves, to the equipment. We can't take those kinds of risks. So anyone that has any appearance of being under the influence, we've got to take action, and that's why you play a critical role in this. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what is probable cause or reasonable suspicion, or what are those times where you may step in as the supervisor and take some actions to either go and have them tested. First, let me say that we don't want anyone, and tell me if I'm off on this, Ross, I don't want to be speaking for you, but we don't want you to just go up to someone and say, hey, you appear like you're intoxicated, I want you to go testing. We want you to, you're out there, you're the eyes and ears, you get the information, facts, and then channel it back into Rasa and Chuck, and, so that you've got a, kind of a call.
And Frank, we need to involve Frank in all of it.
Okay, and Frank, thank you.
Yeah, our safety.
Ken, I want to interject just one thing. It's minor, but it's important in Colorado. When we talk about being under the influence, you mentioned illegal drugs. Well, in Colorado, because of the fact that marijuana is legal, it may be a legal substance that we still have to monitor people for being under the influence.
Yeah, thank you. And it's not legal for them to come to work intoxicated. Same with alcohol. I mean, alcohol is legal, but they can't come to work under the influence of alcohol. So thank you. Excellent point. So the first, there's lots of signs for this that may cause reasonable suspicion, and so your role is to kind of understand what some of these signs are, and then as you see these things occurring in the workplace, gather the facts and information, and then call Frank or Chuck or Rasa, and then let them kind of coordinate as the next steps. It's very sensitive. If we send someone in for drug testing and we're not handling it right, there could be fines, negative implications to the company. So we've got to make sure that we're being consistent and we're following the correct process for this. So the first one that I've got up here on the screen is just moods. I mean, sometimes the mood may indicate, may be a driver that there's something going on there. This in and of itself probably wouldn't be something, just because someone seems depressed, we're probably not going to say, oops, you're going to send you down for drug testing. But this in combination with some other things that you'll see that we cover here, that's why we kind of have to take everything in, collectively. So they, if they appear anxious, irritable, suspicious, complaining, emotional, unsteady, mood changes, especially like if you see an odd change, they seemed in one mood and then they go to lunch or they come back and now they're like in a whole different mood. That could be an indication. Questions or comments about moods as being one sign of reasonable suspicion. All right, so the next one is their actions. Their actions speak miles. So withdrawal or improperly talkative, spends excessive amount of time on the phone, argumentative, exaggerating, displays violent behavior, avoids talking with supervisors or others about work. So same thing here. I mean, if I just take one of these things isolated, probably not going to be a reason to say, oops, there is drug use here. But these things taken collectively with other, you look at their mood, you look at their behavior, their actions, gives us some other indication that there could be something going on here, as well as their patterns of attendance. So if somebody has, if they're absent, tardy a lot, especially like Mondays and Fridays or before and after holidays, look for those patterns, and those can be indications. Frequent unreported absences, lots of emergencies that they keep saying they have. High incidence of sicknesses, frequent use of unscheduled vacation time, leaving work area more often than necessary, unexplained disappearances on the job, requesting leaving work early for various reasons on an ongoing basis. And I'll say the same thing again here. All of this kind of has to be taken collectively. We got to look at all of the evidence. Just because somebody's arriving late, isn't the reason we're going to say, reasonable suspicion, drug test. But if they're arriving late and we've got mood problems and issues going on and their productivity perhaps is down, lots of things that might come into play here. Another indicator is, of course, accidents. If they're taking needless risks, disregard for safety of others, higher than average accidents. Of course, we have a post-accident policy. So if there is any sort of an accident or injury, we would have the person go in and complete a drug test. Also, if we look at work patterns, inconsistency in the quality of their work, high and low periods of productivity, poor judgment, lapses in concentration, difficulty in recalling instructions, difficulty in remembering things or admitting to their own mistakes, using more time to complete work than usual, missing deadlines, increased difficulty in handling complex situations. So lots of things within their work. If it gets off pattern or they're not meeting production, maybe another in combination with other things going on. Perhaps the another thing may be even the relationships and the way they're interacting and working with others. Overreaction to criticism, avoiding or withdrawing from peers, complaints from coworkers, borrowing money from fellow employees, persistent job transfer requests, complaints of problems at home. All of these things can be kind of an indication that there may be something going on. The strongest indicators that we have are the physical things that might go on. And this is where, in combination with some of those other behaviors that we talked about, whether that's moods or relationships or patterns of work or actions, you take that in combination with the physical observations, and this gives us a lot more strength to be able to take action. So if they've got dilated or constricted pupils, scratching, red, watery eyes, involuntary eye movements, sniffles, nauseous, flushed skin, sweating, twitching, violent behavior, drowsiness, odor, alcohol or marijuana or something else. Dizziness, muscular incoordination, unconscious, irritable, slurred speech, needle marks. So any of these kinds of things, whether it's their appearance, their breath, their speech, their awareness, attitude, their motor skills, how they walk, all of those things can be some kind of indication for us, physical observation, and this helps us a little bit stronger for us to really be able to take some action. It's hard if I'm just trying to base it off of a mood like depression, but if that in combination with a physical observation, especially we also need to make sure we have facts. So what are the facts that we have? What's the information? Do we have actual witnesses? Whether that's you as the witness and or someone else, especially if you see someone with paraphernalia or using the drugs or shooting up or something of that sort. Let me open it up to your thoughts and comments and questions here for a minute. What are some of your thoughts on the things that we've talked about here, as well as that list that Ross will send out?
Come on, folks. You all got lots of people you have to watch every day. You don't have any questions?
Hey, Ken, this is DJ. Hey, when you say it's a company policy, any incident that there is a drug test involved, and, I need taking that one step further, that incident is whether you're at fault or not at fault. It doesn't matter who's at fault. It's still an incident. And, I just don't want anyone to believe that they're not going to have a drug test if they're not at fault.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, if there's an accident or an injury, it doesn't. We're not looking for fault. It's just an automatic. That's what a post-accident test is. Everyone happens to everyone. So same for you. If any of you are involved in an accident, an incident, an injury, you'll go in. You'll be asked to go in and be tested just like everyone else.
Is Frank on the line?
No, he's traveling.
Okay. All right.
Okay, being ex-cops, you can, this George in Vernal, you can do a horizontal eye gaze nystagmus, vertical eye gaze nystagmus, stuff like that to determine drug, alcohol, and stuff like that. Pupils, lips, cocky looking lips, stuff like that. Just everybody's appearance, We've all been around it, but whether we recognize it or not is another story. So if you have questions, get with somebody that's been in law enforcement before. It's like I've talked to Naples City. They've got, they just retired one of their drug dogs, but I got Larry on board with it and everything else. We're going to get them down here and have drugs around, or the dogs around the yard once in a while, as long as they don't scratch up the trucks and stuff.
Yeah. Well, if they're mad enough to scratch the trucks, then we got a problem. Yeah. The one thing I need to caution, I think, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, we need to be careful when we suspect somebody on drugs and get somebody like George that has been trained to recognize that, because we can get in trouble if we just randomly go out there and pick people that we want. So, like I say, either get a hold of, like, George if he knows it, or Frank, or myself, or Chuck, somebody, that has experience. If you suspect it, put down your suspicions and stuff, but then get a hold of us. Don't wait too long. I mean, don't wait a day and a half, but do it right then, and get somebody else involved so that you're not put at risk for making those decisions, because you can be in trouble if you start just randomly deciding you want to do these suspicions.
And I want to add to that too, Ross. So we have to make sure, if you are trained in some of those tests as like a former police officer, we can't embarrass someone, and we have to be careful. If you're doing any of that kind of thing, doing it in confidence, pulling them aside, And just being careful that we're not narrowing someone out based on their age, religion, nationality, all of that kind of stuff. That's where we really get in trouble. And the other thing is, you have to play a key role. If someone really seems intoxicated, they're slurring their vision, they're staggering, most of us know what it looks like when someone's high or drunk. If you see that, don't let them get in the truck until you follow this other process. I mean, you should be so empowered to say, I don't want you to drive yet. I don't know exactly what you say, but I think you need to, if you notice that kind of level of behavior, you have the right to not let them get in and drive a truck.
I would send them.
Agree with that?
Yeah, I would, and I would send them to the break room or somewhere, just to get them out of the general focus of everybody, but just either to the break room or to my office if you're here. But I would get them out and away from any equipment, anything. Just tell them, I need you to come with me, and I need to talk to you in the break room or something. But I would, if they're in the shop, I'd get them out of the shop, and like you say, don't let them in a truck. You can't, if you suspect that they're not capable, then yeah, you can't let them get in a truck. We have to drive them for their drug tests. We have to do all of that. We can't just say, go get a drug test. So
I'd even question letting them get in their own vehicle until you until you have they get in a vehicle and they're going home from work and they kill someone. Guess who they're going to be coming back to? So.
Well, and if they do happen to get in their own vehicle, then you call the police right away and alert them that that person needs to be picked up. That there's a reasonable suspicion of them being incapable of operating that vehicle. I mean, because they may fight and scream and yell or sneak out and get in their own car, and you can't stop them. But you need to call the police right then and get the police on them before they get up the road very far.
Ross, I did find, this is something we hadn't created before, but I found a reasonable suspicion observation form, where we have somebody that might actually fill out some of these things and what's driving what they think the suspicion is, and then they actually sign. I'll get something like that, sent over to you so you can, look at it and see what you think if we want to create, go to that level. But, at this point, it sounds like to me what our process is if any of you feel that there's reasonable suspicion, based on all of these things we talked about, the moods, their actions, their absenteeism, accidents, work patterns, relationships, physical observations, you gather the information and report it back to Frank, Brasa, or Chuck immediately. If you feel like they are intoxicated or high, you take the steps necessary immediely to minimize the risk. They don't drive, they don't work with equipment, they don't work in the shop, they don't, so do that until they discuss and decide on next actions, whether that's someone driving them down for a drug test or someone taking them home.
Hey, Ross, have all of our managers and supervisors received reasonable suspicion training?
I don't think they have yet, Chuck, and we need to figure out probably how to do that, because they should all have that, really. And I know that there are some that have, but George, how would we get that? Do you have any idea? Could we have?
Well, Frank probably has a log of the training, but I want to make sure that we make it available and get everybody through the training.
It's on Keller, Rasa.
Oh, it's on Keller. Okay.
Yeah. North Dakota has a question.
Okay, you're right. It is on Keller. I remember seeing it now. And I'm setting up, just so you guys know, I'm setting everybody up on Keller for training. So when you start getting that, you'll know what it is. But that's right. This is in there. So we'll make sure you guys get that. Okay, North Dakota.
Okay, we've talked about everything to see what they do have reasonable suspicion. What if we're wrong? What are the repercussions for us as a company if we call out somebody on reasonable suspicion and we're wrong? I mean,
Ken, I think if I'm right, and we followed these steps, and we have a reasonable reason for being suspicious, I don't think we can be held. I don't think we're liable for that.
Yeah,
but if
there's there's no liability as long as we're, as long as we're taking these precautions and we have logic and evidence. If it's based on something like color of skin or something where we don't have concrete evidence, then then there could be fines, there could be negative implications to the business.
When you have a new person come on, you want to look at them close, and like we have a couple here that when they first hired on, I had very high suspicions that they was on stuff. But you watch them over, wasn't anything to where anybody was in a dangerous position. But I watched them, and no mood swings, no physical appearance, nothing, no changes at any time, day or night. So just kind of let that slide at that point,
Well, that's one of the reasons. Don't we do pre-employment testing?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, hopefully we're catching it, before they come in the door. But I know there's ways for people to hide some of that kind of stuff too. But to try to beat the test. But hopefully we're doing that pre-employment testing to catch them right at the very beginning.
Absolutely.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
Just so you guys know, we have had reasonable suspicion several times that we've taken people in. Some have been and some have not, but we've caught a few that we have actually had either alcohol or drug. We caught them with it, and they were terminated. So, but there is a process that Frank goes through with that too. That's I think it's SAAP process where he provides them with information. So that's why we really need to involve Frank in all of this, because there's some follow-up things that the company needs to do even though we terminate them. So.
And Ross, I've recorded this discussion today, so maybe it'll be good to have Frank look through this, and then if he has other comments or suggestions beyond that, he could send something around to us all.
Okay.
So what's our policy if somebody refuses to do the drug test? Are they automatically terminated?
Considered a positive. Yep. If they refuse, you don't let them get in their car, and let them go home. You still take them home or deliver them wherever, and they can send somebody to get their car or whatever. But it's considered, it's considered a positive test if they refuse to do it. So they're terminated.
Okay.
And you can tell them that you can tell them that when if you say we need to take you down for a drug test and they refuse, then you can tell them that refusal is an automatic dismissal. It's considered a positive test, and so you can either go or you can still refuse to go.
Yeah, all drivers know that, or they should know that. All drivers should know that. Office personnel, they might not. So you might have to explain that to them.
Well, I think and I would just I just reiterate it with them that that that's what it is. But it's but anyway, go ahead, Kim.
Great. Well, so I just emphasized it's critical that we as supervisors and leaders that we manage the work environments and control the risks, and if so if somebody appears like they're not capable of working from showing these signs and such, make sure that we're taking the steps necessary to control that. So that was really the core part of our discussion today. Just a reminder of our drug testing policy, and then to give some specific training and the possible things that you might look for to say, do I have reasonable suspicion? And we talked about the actual physical observations as the strongest. Looking at odd things going on with relationships, odd things with work patterns, accidents, absenteeism, their actions and their moods. So there's lots of things, as well as that Ross will send around a detailed list where there's actually check boxes and things. But again, it's usually more of a pattern of multiple things that gives us that full reasonable suspicion. I can't send somebody just because I think they're depressed. but that in combination with some other things then, gives us more of a cause. Rasa?
Ken, one thing I do want to caution, and we had this happen a couple of weeks ago. I had one of our people call and say, my worker didn't show up for work this morning, so I called him, and this was after 3 hours, and he was hungover and still in bed and wanted to come into work, and I told him no, not to come into work, but can I drug test him tomorrow when he comes in? And you can't. You can't drug test them until they're actually at work. So you can't, you have to have suspicion while they're at work. So you can't basically know somebody drank last night, and unless you know that they're still drunk when they come into work and you have reason to suspect that they're still drunk, you can't just drug test them because you know yesterday they were drunk, or alcohol test. So you have to be careful and make sure that they are actually at work, whether it's they're ready to get in their truck or whether they're punched in, but make sure they're at work when you do that.
Now, if you have evidence that someone says, I saw so-and-so after work shooting up heroin or snorting coke or whatever, that's a little different scenario now. Now we actually have evidence that someone's using an illegal substance. We're a drug-free organization, so that may be a different scenario than just that someone called and says, hey, I'm a little hungover today.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. The other thing is with prescription drugs, guys. We had one a while back where the doctor had actually put one of our drivers on a medication for pain, and we actually got documentation and stuff that pain medication only lasted the 24 hours. And so the driver had been off of that medication that long. So that's something else we need to be cautious of, is if we have injured drivers that are on pain medication, we need to make sure that they're off of that medication, cleared their systems before they put them in a truck. We need to watch that.
And one word of caution as well is drug users are professional liars. I've met with many in my years of working in HR. And I can tell you that they'll look you right in the eye and no, I've never used anything like that in my life, and they just snorted it last night. So it's you have to be vigilant and not just taking some of their words on things. So great. Well, thanks everyone. If there's no other questions or comments, we'll wrap up our discussion here this morning. But we appreciate your connecting in, appreciate your helping us manage this risk and dealing with making sure we're eliminating drug use and risk to the organization.